We are talking about how to stop your budget from becoming a wild beast and going feral. Every project has a budget that's approved up front, a dollar amount that's generally assigned to the project as it gets approved. And that budget's comprised of a bunch of things. That's the people who work on the project, which is generally the biggest cost. Technologies such as software and hardware, if there's any kind of consulting or professional services, and then any other expenses like travel. And early on, there's not a lot known. So assumptions are made based on the scope and the high level solution and what you think the work is. But look, the budget is a wild animal that requires taming. And so this is meant to be a survival guide with mostly practical advice, a little bit of humor, some fun graphics. And with the end, the promise is hopefully you will learn how to keep your budget domesticated and not a wild beast. So here's the feral budget. If not managed well, the budget can become feral. They escape when they're left unsupervised. They feast on undocumented scope tweaks. They multiply when scope creeps, and they bite back. Over here, you can see them biting back with the dollars coming out. I would tell you the first image I made was way more gruesome than this, so I had to change it to have coins coming out. They can turn nocturnal, which surprises you only after hours. They hide in the shadows, and the goal is to recognize this feral behavior early so that we can try to tame our beasts. So how do you do that? Well, you spot the tracks. And so that requires tracking the actuals. So every unexplained cost is the paw print that leads to trouble. You want to track the actuals as they come in, the actual costs. How much time did people charge on the project? What are the invoices that come in? Any expenses that show up? Because that becomes the footprints. And you want to look for those unexpected costs. Were there things that came in that didn't match what was in the budget? And where did they come from? And try to explain them. You also want to catch people charging incorrectly. A lot of times when there's big projects, there's charge codes, and lots of people want to hit the charge codes, and you have to look to see, are there people who charged who shouldn't have been? Are there people who charged the wrong codes? Were there people who were supposed to charge but didn't? A lot of times on big programs, I'll have a resource, and their only job is to track down those actuals. And then when in doubt, they sniff out the source. So show me your receipts. Did you actually do the work? Did the consultants meet the expectations so that we pay the invoice? And this early detection is really what prevents the feral outbreak. Now, you have to view the budget as a living creature, thus the metaphor. And budgets are not static, they evolve. So one of my favorite techniques, and we could have done the entire presentation just on this, but one of my favorite techniques is what's called estimate at complete. And the way you think about that is it's the actuals to date plus actually it's the estimate to complete, the forecast remaining. I mistaked my slide here. So it's actuals to date plus the estimate to complete. So meaning if we are in the month of April, my actuals to date would be January, February, and March actuals. And then you add the forecast remaining, which it would be April through the end of the year, and that's your estimate at complete. So, and it's a living process. So every month, that forecasted month then becomes the actual. So once we're in May, April then changes from the forecast to the actuals. And so this is how you sort of keep your forecast living, and it's based on the actuals that have already occurred and what you expect to spend. Because if it grows, then, here's my animal eating the untracked cost, as in the picture over on the right. And you don't want it to be fossilized. It has to be this living process that you maintain at least monthly. And the actuals have already been spent, but you want to adjust as the forecast remaining. You can adjust scope and resources to try to keep that forecast remaining and your EAC close to in line with the budget. It's also important to keep stakeholders aware of the involving animal. If it does start to grow, you might want to tell people so that you manage expectations. And look, sometimes there's a deliberate decision to accept the additional cost, and you want to re-baseline it. So it's not failure, it is animal control. So I've been talked a little bit about keeping the forecast accurate, but the forecasts in this metaphor are really the binoculars where we're spotting the beast sort of, ahead in the jungle. And inaccurate forecast means you're just walking blind into it without sort of looking at it. So that's why I mentioned you want to update the forecast regularly as you learn information. And there's constantly scope changes and schedule changes. And it's important to keep the forecast accurate even if we don't like what they say, we need to be realistic so that there's no surprises at the end, which most executives really don't like. And so that's why you want to align with those actuals. And as you have that accuracy and as you build credibility, that builds trust. Again, even if it's not a great story, you're fully transparent with the information. And so, one of the techniques that I think is really important with managing projects and budgets, as I mentioned, is that people are probably the biggest cost of the project. So, that's generally the team members working on it. And one of the techniques I like using is tracking duration and not just effort. And what do I mean by that is if I've got a resource on my team that they have their effort, the amount of work that they have to do in the week is 30 hours, I may still pay for them to be there 40 hours. And so if you just forecast based on effort, you're not assuming what the driver of the cost is, which is really the duration that the person's on the project. And so they're going to charge the 40 hours if they don't have other charge codes to work on. So you want to track the duration. Then you have people that are going to get dragged into the meetings, right? Just like these people being dragged into the cave of the beast, and they're going to want to charge code. And so sometimes there are unexpected costs that come in, and so you want to make sure that you're forecasting for them because the feral budget hides in the long timelines. People tied up longer means higher costs. So if a project extends a month, you have to extend the run rate of all the resources working on it. And that's where you want to realistically forecast the usage. So that's extra people, that's the duration, and so on. I also think it's important to document the assumptions. Hey, we assumed this phase was going to end in March, and therefore all of these resources are going to roll off, or we assumed, halftime support ongoing, because the beast will sneak those hours into their cave. I promise you. And so you also want to have regular checkups. So reviewing the budget on a regular basis, that's taking it to the vet, as opposed to, oh, we'll figure it out later. Then you run out of time and all of a sudden your actuals to date have eaten up most of your budget and you don't have any kind of forecast remaining. You want to bring snacks to each checkup, meaning you want to bring data, look at actuals, look at trends, look at charge codes, things like that, so that you get a sense of where the challenges are, and then you want to catch them because they have claws. You want to do this at least monthly, possibly weekly, depending on the size of the project. And as I mentioned before, you want to be transparent with the team and leaders of here's how we're trending, because you want to prevent those beasts from sneaking off. And I think it's important to invite the team members so that they know that you're tracking it, they know that you're looking at it, and it builds confidence, but it also sets an expectation to not incorrectly charge cost. So I mentioned this a few times, but I think it's incredibly important to document the assumptions, right? These are your survival notes because I promise you're going to get 6 months into the project and forget why certain choices were made. And, then you're going to get in a meeting and somebody's going to say, oh, I thought you meant this. And that's when my budget becomes feral because you didn't document it. And like I said, there's just memory loss later. So my view is if it's not in the field guide, if we didn't document it, it didn't exist. And so that allows you to help say, hey, look, the assumption changed and therefore my budget changed so that you have that audit trail, which creates the accountability and the clarity. So now we want to tame the beast. You can see here we're petting it. It's much nicer. Treat it like a pet. You want to feed it. You want to track it, clean up any kind of surprises that come in. And that by doing that means keeping the estimate at complete alive. So tracking the actuals often, but really managing the forecast accurately and making sure that the forecast remaining tells the accurate story so that you have a real good sense of what the cost is going to look like at the end of the project. I talked about factoring in duration and not just effort. I talked about documenting assumptions and then consistency, reviewing it on a regular basis. And if you do all of that, that's where you're going to have your well-behaved, trained and tamed beast. So here's the punchline is you want to move it from feral to friendly. Now it's sitting on our lap. It's not biting anybody anymore. And once it's domesticated, it's a loyal companion. It's predictable, it's trustworthy, it's manageable. So I think the budget can be trained, not feared. And so the key, as we've mentioned before, is vigilance and transparency. And your project will thrive when your beast is under control. So the whole punchline is tame your budget before it bites you or others, or you have to put it down, which is probably not good for the project. Thanks for watching.